On a quiet summer day, as life carried on in small towns and cities across North America, few could have predicted the storm that was about to break. The air was thick with anticipation, but most people were blissfully unaware of the seismic shift about to shake the continent. In a move that sent shockwaves through the global economy, President Trump stunned markets by imposing a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian imports. The announcement came without warning, catching both allies and adversaries off guard, and instantly dominating headlines around the world. This bold action was a direct challenge to decades of North American economic partnership. For years, the United States and Canada had built a tightly woven web of supply chains, with goods and services flowing seamlessly across the border. Now that delicate balance was under threat, and the future of countless businesses hung in the balance. Prime Minister Mark Carney, facing a critical election and mounting pressure at home, was thrust into the spotlight. He faced a stark choice: absorb the economic blow and risk appearing weak, or fight back and risk plunging both nations into a full-blown trade war with unpredictable consequences. The stakes could not have been higher. The US and Canada, sharing the world's longest undefended border and with millions of jobs intertwined, now stood on the brink of a historic economic conflict. Families, workers, and entire industries watched anxiously, knowing their livelihoods could be upended overnight. Financial markets tumbled in response, with investors scrambling to make sense of the chaos. Businesses on both sides of the border rushed to assess the impact, while the era of quiet diplomacy and stable trade relations seemed to vanish in an instant. The president's message was unmistakable. Any hint of Canadian retaliation would be met with even harsher measures. The tone was uncompromising, signaling a willingness to escalate the conflict if necessary. This was more than just a change in policy. It was a bold political statement. The United States was turning inward, embracing an America First agenda, and stepping away from decades of global cooperation and shared prosperity. Around the world, people watched with bated breath. Newsrooms buzzed with speculation, and international leaders scrambled to respond to the rapidly evolving crisis. The uncertainty was palpable, and the stakes were global. The stage was set for a confrontation that could reshape not only the relationship between two neighboring nations, but the very fabric of the global order itself. Ontario, Canada's industrial powerhouse, was hit hardest by the tariffs. Its factories, once humming with activity, suddenly found themselves at a standstill. The impact was immediate and visible, as production lines ground to a halt, and the familiar rhythm of industry faded from the province's cities and towns. Nowhere was this more evident than in Ontario's auto sector, which is deeply intertwined with U.S. manufacturing. For decades, cars and parts flowed seamlessly across the border, fueling jobs and prosperity on both sides. In response, Premier Doug Ford, with the full backing of federal leaders, made a bold and unprecedented move. Ontario would halt exports of critical goods to the U.S. This included not just finished vehicles but also EV batteries, essential minerals, and other components vital to American industry. This was no empty threat. The shutdown was carefully orchestrated, targeting the very supply chains that American manufacturers relied on. Overnight, warehouses filled with unsent goods and trucks destined for the U.S. were stopped at the border. The effects rippled quickly. Detroit's car plants, which depend on Ontario's parts, saw their assembly lines stall. In Silicon Valley, tech firms faced delays as key components failed to arrive. Store shelves began to show gaps, and the vulnerability of these cross-border ties was laid bare. The gamble was enormous. Ontario's own factories sat idle, and thousands of workers were sent home, uncertain when or if they would return. Yet for Canadian leaders, there seemed to be no other way to push back against the U.S. tariffs and defend their industries. The message was clear: Canada would not be bullied or sidelined. Instead, it would stand as a vital partner, one with real leverage and the willingness to use it. Political leaders, business owners, and workers rallied together, determined to show unity in the face of economic pressure. By stopping the flow of goods, Ontario hoped to force a fundamental rethink in Washington. The province's leaders believed that only by demonstrating the true cost of disruption could they bring the U.S. to the negotiating table. This was economic nationalism in action, a direct response to America First policies. The standoff was no longer just about tariffs. It was about pride, sovereignty, and the future of North American industry. The industrial heartbeat that once pulsed across the border had stopped, by design, not by accident. The silence in factories and on highways was a powerful signal to both nations: Both sides now faced immediate pain. Workers, families, and entire communities braced for the uncertainty ahead, knowing that the stakes had never been higher. The trade war was no longer just a headline, it had become a harsh reality, reshaping lives and economies on both sides of the border. As US-Canada trade froze, Europe saw its chance. European automakers and tech giants, eager to secure green energy supplies, swooped in, striking a $20 billion deal with Ontario for EV batteries and critical minerals. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a strategic alliance, giving Europe a reliable partner outside the volatile US sphere. Ontario's factories, once idle, roared back to life, now serving European demand. For Europe it was a masterstroke, access to high-quality, ethically sourced materials and advanced tech from a stable ally. For Canada it was vindication, and a lifeline. The flow of goods and innovation shifted from north-south to east-west, redrawing the global economic map. America's tariffs had pushed its closest neighbor into the arms of its rivals. The lesson, in a global economy, walls have consequences. The US was left watching opportunity slip away. The fallout hit American workers fast. In towns built around the hum of assembly lines, the silence was deafening. Families who had relied on steady paychecks for generations suddenly faced an uncertain future, as the lifeblood of their communities drained away almost overnight. Stellantis shut down plants in both Windsor, Ontario, and across the US, laying off thousands as supply chains snapped. Parking lots that once overflowed with cars now sat empty, echoing the loss felt by entire neighborhoods. The just-in-time model that kept costs low now left factories idle with parts and batteries stranded in Canada. Assembly lines ground to a halt and warehouses filled with unsent goods, turning efficiency into vulnerability. Small suppliers across the Midwest saw orders vanish, triggering more layoffs and economic pain. Local machine shops and parts makers, already operating on thin margins, were forced to close their doors, leaving skilled workers with nowhere to turn. The American Automotive Policy Council warned, tariffs and chaos were driving up costs and killing jobs. Industry leaders pleaded for relief, but the uncertainty only deepened, fueling protests and heated debates in the halls of power. The promise to protect American workers had backfired. Pink slips replaced paychecks. For many, the American dream was slipping away, replaced by anxiety and frustration as bills piled up and savings dwindled. The irony was bitter. The very people tariffs aimed to help were now their first casualties. Hopes for a manufacturing revival faded, replaced by a sense of betrayal and loss. Decades of integration couldn't be undone overnight without real damage. The seamless flow of goods and labor that once defined the border was now a memory, replaced by gridlock and confusion. The shutdowns showed how deeply the two economies were intertwined. Headlines blared the news, but the true impact was felt in the empty streets and shuttered storefronts of once thriving towns. Economic walls, it turned out, trapped those they were meant to protect. Instead of shielding jobs, they isolated communities and deepened the crisis. The cost of conflict was now painfully clear. For workers, families, and entire regions, the price was measured not just in lost jobs, but in lost hope for the future. The trade war's impact soon hit every American household. Tariffs and supply chain chaos drove up prices on everyday goods, from coffee and orange juice to toys and building materials. Companies like Hasbro warned of higher prices, while home builders cautioned that tariffs on materials would make homes less affordable. The hidden tax of tariffs fell on consumers, not foreign producers. Each trip to the store became a reminder: trade wars make life more expensive. Families stretch their budgets, forced to make tough choices. The grand strategies of global trade had become a daily burden at the checkout. In the end, it was ordinary Americans who paid the price. The cost of protectionism was real, and rising. The economic pain was no longer abstract. Europe's rush to partner with Ontario was shaped by a recent failure. Northvolt, once its battery champion, collapsed despite massive investment. Northvolt's bankruptcy exposed the risks of building supply chains from scratch and the need for reliable partners. Europe learned the hard way that ambition and subsidies weren't enough in the brutal global battery race. That's why when the US-Canada rift opened, Europe moved fast to secure Ontario's resources and technology. The Northvolt saga was a warning. In the race for green tech, hesitation means falling behind. Europe wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. The US-Canada trade war triggered a global realignment. Canada pivoted to Europe and strengthened ties with Mexico, seeking stability outside America's shadow. Other nations followed suit. Brazil, hit by US tariffs, turned to China and the BRICS bloc. The European Union, wary of US unpredictability, pursued its own trade agenda. The world began to fracture into competing blocs, with old alliances strained and new ones forming. The rules-based order gave way to transactional deals and shifting loyalties. America's aggressive stance risked isolating it from key partners. The scramble for new alliances was on, and the outcome was uncertain. The era of deep integration was ending. The global map was being redrawn in real time. With jobs lost and prices rising, pressure mounted for a solution. In Canada, the trade war became an election issue. Leaders promised to negotiate, knowing prosperity depended on US partnership. In the US, President Trump's base demanded toughness, but business groups and voters felt the pain. The standoff was unsustainable. Both sides faced mounting costs. A new deal would require compromise, clear rules for key sectors, and a willingness to move past short-term politics. The alternative, a grinding economic war that would leave both nations weaker. The choice was stark: negotiation or lasting damage. His trade war is more than a policy dispute. It's a crossroads for America's role in the world. Decades of prosperity were built on open markets and strong alliances. Now protectionism threatens to isolate the US, raising costs and shrinking choices for consumers and industries alike. As Canada and others forge new alliances, America risks being left behind. The alternative is to rebuild trust, update agreements, and recognize that prosperity is shared, not zero-sum. The decisions made now will shape the nation's future for generations. Will the US double down on economic nationalism or seek a new path of cooperation? The world isn't waiting. America stands at a true crossroads. Its next move will define the era to come.